the other side of it too, bro, is from a creative standpoint, sitting back and saying what we long for and what we latch to as humans in general is something that kind of disrupts or interrupts our typical and daily patterns. We kind of long for those things because it means that something new is happening. And new is always good until we get too stuck into a rhythm. And for salespeople, they're stuck in their rhythms. They get stuck in them for 20 plus years. And so let's go back to the same gentleman that I was coaching at the beginning of my career at the Sales Rebellion, who then went out and did 13 drops with something that we're going to talk about today. And he got 9 responses and appointments with those. And I'll never forget it because he called me that day and said, I've never done anything like this in my life. Usually if I make 20 calls, I get maybe 1 interaction. And it's like a 50-50 shot as to whether or not it's a yes or a no. And it's in those moments too that we ourselves tap into our own inner creativity, on with the help of somebody else in some cases. And now for me, like my creativity comes from being a musician. I'm naturally creative just as a human. Like I was born with the gene, if you want to say it that way. But being a musician for so long, I was in a creative space all the time. I was constantly being challenged, challenging others. And I was always in a place in my head where, like, when you walk into a dark room where no one can see each other and the music's too loud, how do you create a fun environment here? An atmosphere that people will remember when they wake up the next morning, something that people will long to come back to at the next time you show up in town as well too. So for me, it all starts from the human interaction between one to another, right? More so than how can I sell you my product? And if we go there, creativity is a lot easier to jump into in the first place.
I love that approach. I remember being in early in my sales career, and I think I would think about it differently now, obviously, but I think taking the leap to go outside of the normal is not an easy thing to do if you are if you're new in sales, whether you're a sales development rep, you're an account exec, you're in, whatever variety of sales role that you might be in. And so how did you, and like, I know the answer would be different now because you understand the benefits of, like, I know it's helpful to be creative. Where did that courage come from? Or how did you think about that first opportunity to do something different? Right? Because it takes guts. It takes, like, hey, I could potentially sacrifice this lead list to try something weird, and they may hate it and hate me, and then all the world is going to end, and then I'm going to get fired, and then I'm going to be homeless and living in a van down by the river.
Dude, and you're not far off, right? When we're young, especially, our brain goes to these places that it doesn't need to go in the first place. We typically, as humans in general, we exaggerate things. It's just kind of human nature to do that. And that's where creativity comes into play very well. Because if we exaggerate the interaction in the moment that we're having it and make it more fun and more creative and obnoxious, even, it's like you just said earlier, Colin, you said you were certifiably crazy in the best way. And I take that as the best compliment anybody could give me. By the way, you said midi-chlorians earlier. We got to discuss this and not discuss it, but let's just throw it out there for the audience. Like, there are Star Wars people that don't like midi-chlorians, right? So, like, we'll come back to that later. Okay. Please start talking about it in the chat though. Yes for midi-chlorians or no? Are you a George Lucas, purist, or are you kind of like, why'd you do that, bro? But coming back to this identity again of saying how and why, right? At the same time too, because you want to know why, Colin? It's this simple. I sat in a bullpen at my dad's office. For those that don't know my story, I worked for my father full-time selling copiers for 4 years before his company was acquired. And I was thrown to the wolves. But when I was thrown to the wolves, I survived. Beyond survival, I thrived. I became the number 1 rep at the organization and eventually became the VP of sales. And the thought process behind, and it was all net new business. Everybody listening, net new business. I didn't thrive on an existing list. I didn't get put into this situation where I was like, oh, here's all this stuff. My dad lost $600,000 in revenue the year that he hired me. So we were living off gas station hot dogs, literally using gas cards, like credit cards, because we maxed everything else out. We had no money in the bank. So,
Nice.
So no survival mindset here whatsoever in the midst of everything that you just heard, but to thrive. And so here's where I sat in a bullpen where most of the people were commission based. And at that point in time as well, too, I had a draw and so did everybody else. right? But prior to, like, nobody knew what a draw was, or a salary even for that matter, and as a sales rep, right? So I came from this culture of saying you have to you got to kill what you're going to eat
Wait,
yourself. And
wait. Your dad
yes,
had you on a draw?
my dad had me on a draw, bro. He
it
didn't
was
pay me a salary.
it was his own company.
Yeah.
Wow. Can you for the
He wasn't a terrible person,
no,
everybody listening.
it's an old school way of thinking about it, right? Like, especially coming in the copier world, like, it wasn't uncommon to be 100% commission and to have to pay
Right.
for your training materials and like this and this and that. It's not like
Right.
you were going door to door selling knives for Cutco, but it's a step up. For those uninitiated, explain to the SDRs of the world what a draw is.
Oh man, it sucks going back this far, right?
I know.
But
I've been
God,
there.
it sucked.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah. So you basically, everybody listening, imagine that every week you got paid $500, and imagine at the end of the month that you owed all that money back, basically, based on the quota you were supposed to hit, and the money, that the actual revenue that you brought in. So imagine that, like, that the company would then come to you and go, "Hey, we'll keep paying your draw, but now you owe us $3,000." And so when you make a commission, it's coming out of there. And so essentially now you're already sitting in this place where, like, $500 is not a lot of money, period. And imagine after taxes what that looked like. And I think for me, when I started, I think it was $250 a week.
Yeah.
I want to say 250 or 275. So that, and again, this was 2007, so it was a little bit different, right? Now we have $15 minimum wage, or we do so soon, or Canada does. Somebody has it. So anyway, so the thought process again is, from a draw perspective, is that you have to thrive. This is the only way to really enjoy what you do, because if you're surviving, you'll be unhappy. You'll fall to the temptations of what sales brings with it, the silent enemy as well of sales, which is depression, mental, losing your mental fortitude. There's lots of little pieces of that puzzle. So I remember sitting in that bullpen and thinking to myself, why are we calling 200 people a day to get hung up on? Why aren't we saying, here are 10 very qualified people that could possibly buy from us between now and when their equipment that we were selling is up, and going and securing relationships with them. And the thought process was, you can't go knock on that door, Colin, and say, "Hey guys, I brought you some cookies and I wanted to be friends," and then maybe one day sell you something. Like, that doesn't work, right? Period. Because A, that's self-serving, because you have no idea what boat they're in and whether or not they want a relationship with you in the first place. And B, it's this identity of an expectation, right? Salespeople have too many expectations day in and day out, too many assumptions as well too. And so I fought against those things, and I said, what if I gave people an experience that they deserved and that they longed for instead? And that's when I started to get creative and think, what's out there? Stu Heineck was one of the first people that I found. He became my silent mentor over the years, where
silent
he told
mentor
stories
means you
about people.
stalked him, right?
Yes. Thank you for clarifying.
Aaron was my silent mentor in the early days too. So cool. I'm just like, I call it internet stalking. You call it silent mentor. Potato.
Yeah.
Just clarifying.
Yeah. So, kind of the same thing. He was my silent, I stalked him mentor. Yes. There we go. I think that it works like that. And I learned things about, like, a guy sending $1,000 sword to another person with their name engraved on it and winning $100 million sale. And I thought, that works, but a lot of that stuff is also gimmicky. So in my mind, I started to deduce, what are the common assumptions that people have about sales, all salespeople, not just, oh, you're a copier salesman, or, oh, you sell white pages, or whatever was popular at that point in time, right? Not just this, put them in a box, but like, everybody feels equally distant to salespeople. And that's one of the things that I found very, very quickly in my career, was that everybody hates salespeople. And so it was easy for me to take the stereotypes, the things that were wrong, the interactions that happen, which again are very generic. And so they work from a scalability perspective. Mm-hmm. That, like, I can't just send everybody a sword or a shoe and say, now that I got a foot in the door, like, people are going to see the gimmick in that. And then the other side is like, how could I hyper personalize that and make it scalable? You can't. It's impossible. And so instead, the experience is hyper personalized, not necessarily the message. It doesn't say, speak to them in their alma mater and their 5-year-old son that plays t-ball that I stalked and found out the information about, to not beat around that word. But again, this idea of creating something very familiar, because that sparks a certain part of the brain that then turns it on and starts to tell a story. and then also the relevance to it as well. And with those two ingredients alone, curiosity kicks in. And now creativity and curiosity marry up so well, and buying decisions are created through curiosity and this identity of, what's going to happen to me, the give or take. Like, what happens if I say yes? What happens if I say no? And it's in those moments that we, again, psychologically, that we can connect with a human being naturally instead of manipulating. So creativity, bottom line, is the most basic way to really sell somebody something without making them feel like you're going through the motions or creating some kind of gimmick.